Welcome back. So in this final section of chapter 3, I want to talk to you about the last two ports that we didn't talk about when making our circuits before, right? And that's these guys right here, this 3.3 volt and this 5 volt pin. So here's what I want to sort of explain about this and what's going on. These 3.3 volts and 5 volt pins are similar to the ground pins in that they don't involve any code to write. Now, what I mean by that is these pins will always give constant power to your LED. These will always give a constant positive end, right? So remember, think back to the positive end of the battery, right? This will always give a constant positive end of the battery, a constant positive current, as long as the Arduino is on. So you don't have to write any code for it. They will always output either 5 volts or 3.3 volts, that positive current, as long as the Arduino is on. So just to demonstrate that, I'm going to quickly make a circuit involving an LED. And I'm going to first hook it up to the 5 volt pin, and then I'm going to hook it up to the 3.3 volt pin. So let's grab a resistor here. We're going to use the same... Let me see if I can make this sideways a little bit. Yeah, okay, cool. So we're going to use the same 450 ohm resistor. So I think it'll do the job for us. Okay, and then I'm going to connect this to 5 volts. Okay, then I'm going to connect my other guy to ground. All right, here we go. Lovely. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and start simulation. You can see that without any code, right, I didn't use pin mode or digital write or anything like that, right? I was able to turn on this LED. Now let's look at what happens if I switched it to 3.3 volts, right? Actually, I don't want to switch it. Let's just make a new LED, because why not, right? It's helpful to view things at a side-by-side level. Let's duplicate that. Okay. Let's get some wiring going into ground. Ignore the strange wiring angles. Usually you would never do this, but I just want to do this a little bit quickly, just so I can get my point across. Okay, so let's start simulation. Now, it's kind of hard to tell, but this LED is actually a little bit dimmer than this one, right? It's a little bit trickier to tell in this situation, but the difference will definitely be there, especially if you did it physically. So you might be wondering, like, okay, lower voltage, LED is less bright. That makes a lot of sense, right? But why is there a 3.3 volts and a 5 volts? Why isn't there just a 5 volts, or why isn't there just a 3.3 volts? And for that, let's talk about that. Here are the key differences to note. So there's obviously that 1v7 difference. Note that, like, in circuit sort of, as a way of writing 1.7, we use 1v7. Okay, so that's just a notation thing. So something interesting is that 3.3 volts is actually a standard power supply voltage level because it forces circuits to be efficient with power usage. So we naturally require that if you naturally require that circuits use low voltage, you're going to have to learn to be really efficient with that voltage, right? And actually 5 volts used to be the standard. And USB power, so when you plug in your Arduino to the USB port, it's actually 5 volts. But 3.3 volts is actually now a new standard, and some are even suggesting 2.5 volts. Because, again, lower voltage means we can work with more efficient components, be more power efficient, right? I mean, everything nowadays is all about power efficiency, right? Like, how can I make this more efficient and use less power to get the same output, right? So something else to note is that lower voltages are generally more favored, but just because it's more favored doesn't mean that it might suit your requirements, right? So even though it's really common to see 3.3 volts just because of all the power benefits, something to keep in mind is that it all depends on your application, right? If you need 5 volts and your device requires 5 volts, use 5 volts. But if you can use 3.3 volts, right, it's a lot better, right? Because you don't have to use as much power. So those are the differences, right? So again, main thing to keep in mind is that it's just a lower voltage, right? And if you want, you can reference a slide as a list of reasons why we kind of care. But lower voltage, and these always stay on, right? These kind of like mimic the positive end of the battery, if you want a nice acronym to go along with that. So yeah, that wraps up chapter 3. Hope you learned a lot. We're going to go into chapter 4. We're going to learn a lot more about connecting these other really cool components to our Arduino. So no more LEDs. Well, LEDs are going to kind of stay, but we're going to add a lot more things. All right. See you in the next video.